scratches from beyond. Every night, as the clock chimes midnight, a chilling scratching begins within the walls of my old Victorian house. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling or perhaps the scurrying of mice. But as the nights progressed, the scratching grew louder, more desperate. It seemed to follow me, confined within the walls of whatever room I occupied, a constant reminder that I was not alone. I decided to investigate, peeling back the layers of wallpaper to reveal the plaster beneath. To my horror, instead of the gnawed tunnels of rodents, I found symbols, strange, angular shapes that seemed to shift and writhe under my gaze. They were unlike any language I knew, yet they evoked a deep sense of dread within me. The next day, I visited the local library, poring over ancient texts in forgotten languages, but found nothing that matched the eerie script. That night, the scratching intensified, accompanied by a faint whispering. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking, uttering words in a tongue lost to time. I invited a friend over, hoping to prove to myself that I wasn't going mad. But as the clock struck 12, the scratching began anew, and the blood drained from my friend's face. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak as the whispers grew louder, surrounding us. In a moment of desperation, I pressed my ear against the wall, the symbols burning into my memory. The whispers became clear, speaking my name, beckoning me to join them. My friend grabbed my arm, pulling me away, but it was too late. The symbols had etched themselves into my mind, an indelible mark of the house's dark history. We spent the rest of the night searching the house's records, discovering tales of a previous owner, a reclusive scholar who dabbled in the occult. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the mysterious symbols as a clue to his fate. As dawn broke, the scratching ceased, and the whispers faded. But the fear remained, a constant shadow at the back of my mind. I knew I had to uncover the truth behind the symbols and the scholar's disappearance. But little did I know, my search would lead me down a path of unspeakable terror. The day's light brought temporary relief, but the dread of nightfall loomed over me. I scoured the scholar's notes left in the dusty attic, hoping to find a connection to the symbols and the scratching. His writings were erratic, filled with references to otherworldly beings and gateways to realms beyond our understanding. It was clear he had been consumed by his quest for knowledge, a quest that led to his disappearance. As I delved deeper into the texts, I stumbled upon a diary entry detailing a ritual. The scholar believed the symbols were a key, a means to communicate with the entities that whispered through the walls. He intended to perform the ritual on the night of a new moon, the same phase the moon was in tonight. Determined to end the nightly torment, I resolved to complete the ritual myself. I gathered the necessary items, candles, chalk, and an antique mirror the scholar had mentioned in his notes. As the sun set, I drew the symbols on the floor, lit the candles, and positioned the mirror as instructed. The scratching started as I began the incantation, the words feeling alien as they left my lips. The air grew thick, the candles flickered wildly, and the mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water. Then, silence. The scratching stopped, and for a moment, I thought I had succeeded. But then, the mirror shattered, and from its broken pieces, a figure emerged. It was the scholar, his eyes hollow, his form ethereal. He spoke in a voice that was both his and not. "You have freed me, but they are coming for you now." Panic set in as the walls of my house began to crumble, revealing a vast, dark void beyond. Shadowy figures writhed in the darkness, their whispers growing into a cacophony of voices. The scholar's apparition pointed to the symbols: finish the ritual, or be lost forever. I scrambled to complete the incantation, the symbols glowing with an otherworldly light. The figures drew closer, their forms becoming clearer, twisted, humanoid shapes with eyes that burned like coals. Just as they were about to reach me, the ritual reached its climax, and a blinding light enveloped the room. When my vision cleared, the house was silent, the figures gone. But the relief was short-lived. In the mirror's remaining shard, I saw not my reflection, but a glimpse of another place, a place where the sky was an endless night, and countless eyes stared back at me. The shattered mirror lay before me, a portal to an unfathomable abyss. The scholar's warning echoed in my mind as I stared into the void. The symbols on the wall pulsated with a sinister energy, their glow casting long, twisted shadows across the room. I could feel the eyes from the other side, watching, waiting. I knew I couldn't leave the house, not with the gateway open and the entities that lurked just beyond my reality. The scratching had ceased, but the whispers had transformed into a low, menacing hum. It was the sound of something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for a chance to enter our world. As night enveloped the house, the temperature dropped, and my breath became visible in the air. The darkness seemed to press against the windows, trying to seep through any crack it could find. I lit a fire in the hearth, hoping to ward off the cold and the creeping dread that came with it. I decided to confront the scholar's spirit, to demand answers. Using the remaining shard of the mirror, I called out to him. His apparition flickered into existence, his face contorted with fear. "They are the Watchers," he whispered. "Guardians of the threshold between worlds. You must close the gateway, or they will consume your soul." The task seemed impossible. The symbols were a language of power, one that I barely understood. But as the scholar's spirit dissipated, I realized that the answer lay within the house itself. The Victorian architecture, the ornate carvings, and the very foundation, it was all part of a larger ritual circle, one that the scholar had unwittingly completed. I raced against time, deciphering the scholar's notes and aligning the house's features with the symbols. The hum grew louder, and the shadows danced with frenetic energy. I could feel the Watchers' impatience, their hunger. It was now or never. With the final symbol in place, I recited the incantation. A surge of power rippled through the house, and the symbols blazed with light. The hum turned into a shriek as the gateway began to close. But just as the light reached its peak, a hand, a claw, reached through the mirror, its fingers inches from my face. The light exploded, sending shards of glass and energy throughout the room. When the chaos settled, the house was silent once more. The gateway was closed, the Watchers gone. But the cost of my victory was clear. In the mirror's reflection, my eyes were no longer my own. They were the eyes of the abyss, filled with the knowledge and horror of what lay beyond. The scratching may have stopped, but now, every night, I hear the sound of my own voice, whispering secrets from the other side of the wall. Hey! Subscribe for more scary stories. Story 2. The Unseen Portal. I remember the day the letter arrived, nondescript and unassuming, but it carried an air of silent foreboding. It was addressed to me, yet the sender's details were conspicuously absent. Inside, a single photograph lay flat, a door, old and weathered, its paint peeling to reveal the ancient wood beneath. It was a door I had never seen before, and yet, it beckoned me with an eerie familiarity. Days passed, and each time I glanced at the photo, a chill ran down my spine. The door, once a mere image, seemed to inch closer with every look. The background, previously a blur, now revealed more details, a decrepit building, windows like hollow eyes, and a sense of desolation that seemed almost palpable. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the mind, but the photograph had other plans. It began to appear in my dreams, each time the door opening slightly wider, revealing only darkness beyond. The air around the photo grew colder, and a faint, almost inaudible whisper seemed to emanate from it when the house was silent. The whispers grew into murmurs, forming words I couldn't understand. I found myself drawn to the photo, my nights consumed by the need to decipher its message. The door now stood ajar in the image, an invitation or a warning, I couldn't tell. One night, as the murmurs swelled into a cacophony, I saw it, a figure in the photograph, standing by the door. It was shadowy and indistinct, but its presence was undeniable. It seemed to stare right at me, through me, as if it knew me. The next morning, I woke up to find the photograph gone. In its place, a new letter with no photograph, only a message, "Come find me. Through the threshold, you'll see." The handwriting was mine, but I had no recollection of writing it. As I sit here, penning this account, the air grows colder, and the whispers return. I can feel the door, though unseen, is closer than ever. It's calling me, and I fear I may answer. The whispers didn't cease. They grew into a symphony of silent screams that only I could hear. I felt the pull of the unseen door, its presence now a constant in my life. It was as if the photograph had imprinted itself onto my very soul, its image burned into my retinas. I began to see the door everywhere, in reflections, shadows, and the edges of my vision. It was never fully materialized, always elusive, yet unmistakably there. The figure from the photograph haunted me too, a specter that followed me in my waking hours and invaded my dreams. My research into the building in the background of the photo led me nowhere. It was as if it didn't exist, yet it stood there in the picture, as real as the fear that gripped me. The more I searched, the more I felt the door's proximity, an invisible force tugging at the edges of reality. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard a knock. 3 slow, deliberate thuds that resonated with an otherworldly echo. I opened my front door to find nothing but the chilling embrace of the night air. But when I turned around, there it was, the door from the photograph, now a part of my home. I approached it, each step heavy with dread. The whispers grew louder, urging me forward. My hand reached for the knob, cold and unyielding, and as I turned it, the door creaked open to reveal a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow the light. The figure stood in the threshold, its form clearer now. It was human, or had been once. Its eyes, hollow and endless, stared into mine, and I heard its voice, a whisper that caught through the silence, "You found me." I stepped through the door, and the world I knew fell away. I was in the building from the photograph, the air thick with the scent of decay. The whispers were all around me, and I realized they were voices, each telling their own tale of sorrow. The building's interior was a labyrinth of decay, each room a snapshot of lives once lived. The voices grew louder, their echoes bouncing off the peeling walls, telling stories of joy and pain, love and loss. It was as if the building itself was alive, breathing through the whispers of its former inhabitants. I navigated the dim corridors, the figure from the door now my silent guide. It led me deeper into the heart of the structure, where the air was heavy with a sense of anticipation. The whispers converged into a single voice, one that spoke directly to me, "You are home." The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. This place, this forgotten edifice, was not just a building, it was a repository of memories, and I was connected to it in ways I couldn't comprehend. The photograph, the door, they were all part of me. My guide stopped before a room, its door unlike the others, newer, less worn. It opened without a sound, revealing a space that was starkly out of place. It was my childhood bedroom, recreated down to the smallest detail. The whispers fell silent, and I was alone with my thoughts. There, on the bed, was another photograph. It showed the building as it once was, vibrant and full of life. And there I was, a child, smiling back at the camera. But how could this be? I had no memory of this place. As I looked up, the walls began to shift, the room melting away to reveal a hidden truth. The building, the door, the figure, they were all fragments of my own mind, a manifestation of forgotten traumas and buried fears. The figure reappeared, its form clearer now, a mirror image of myself. "You must remember," it whispered. And with those words, the walls crumbled, the building faded, and I was left standing in an empty field, the ruins of the structure at my feet. Story 3. Whispers of the Absent. I always found comfort in the predictable patterns of our life. The way the morning light danced through the curtains, the sound of the kettle signaling the start of a new day, and the reassuring cadence of my husband's voice as he'd call to say he'd be home soon. But that day, something was off. His voice on the phone sounded distant, distorted, almost as if it was being dragged through static. "I'll be home soon," he said, but the warmth I was accustomed to was missing. The hours ticked by, each minute stretching longer than the last. The house felt colder, the shadows in the corners darker, and the silence louder. When the door finally creaked open, relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. He stood there, in the doorway, his figure outlined by the dying light of dusk. His eyes, once vibrant and full of life, were now hollow, devoid of the spark that I loved. "Dinner's almost ready," I said, attempting to mask my growing unease. He didn't respond, just walked past me, his footsteps echoing against the hardwood floor. At the dinner table, he ate in silence, his movements mechanical, alien. I tried to engage him in conversation, to break through the invisible barrier that had formed, but his replies were curt, his voice a stranger's. That night, as we lay in bed, the distance between us was palpable. The man I had married seemed to have been replaced by an imposter, a shell with the same face but none of the essence. I listened to his breathing, even that sounded different, ragged and uneven. Sleep eluded me, and the darkness of the room felt oppressive, suffocating. In the early hours of the morning, I awoke to a whisper. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again, clearer, closer. It was coming from him, or at least, the entity that resembled him. The words were indecipherable, a language I couldn't understand, but the tone was pleading, desperate. The next day, I followed him. I needed answers. He walked the streets like a man on a mission, yet his destination was unknown. He stopped in front of an old, decrepit house, its windows boarded, its history forgotten. He stood there for what felt like hours, just staring. I wanted to call out to him, to ask what he was doing, but fear rooted me to the spot. As the sun began to set, he turned and walked away, leaving the house and its secrets behind. I knew then that whatever had happened to him, whatever had taken hold of him, was connected to that place. And I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The morning after my unsettling discovery, I resolved to visit the forsaken house that had captivated my husband's attention. The daylight did little to dispel the gloom that clung to the dilapidated structure. As I approached, a shiver ran down my spine, not from the chill in the air, but from the sense of dread that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. I hesitated at the threshold, the door hanging ajar as if inviting me into its dark maw. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards under my tentative steps. The house felt alive, watching me with unseen eyes, whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. In the living room, the remnants of a life once lived lay scattered, a broken picture frame, a faded armchair, a child's toy left forgotten. Each object seemed to hold a piece of the story, a fragment of the tragedy that had unfolded within these walls. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter and tears, the remnants of joy and sorrow intertwined. As I ascended the staircase, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer just sounds, but voices, pleading, warning, beckoning. I reached the top and found myself drawn to a door at the end of the hallway. It was different from the others, its wood darker, its surface etched with strange symbols that made my head ache to look at them. I pushed the door open, and the voices fell silent. The room was shrouded in shadows, the curtains drawn tight against the intrusion of light. And there, in the center of the room, stood a telephone, its cord twisted, its receiver off the hook. It was an anachronism in this abandoned place, and yet it seemed to be waiting, expectant. I reached out, my hand trembling, and lifted the receiver to my ear. Static filled the line, a cacophony of noise that made me wince. But then, amidst the chaos, I heard it, a voice, my husband's voice, but distorted, as if filtered through a lens of pain and fear. "Leave, now," it warned, before the line went dead. Panic seized me, and I fled the room, the house, the whispers chasing me as I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the safety of my own home. But as I locked the door behind me, I realized the whispers had followed me, and they were growing louder. I was no longer the hunter, I had become the prey. The whispers were no longer confined to the shadows of the night, they had seeped into the daylight, into the very walls of my home. I could hear them, a constant murmur, like a crowd of unseen spectators watching my every move. My husband, or the entity that wore his face, moved through the house like a ghost, his presence an eerie reminder of the man he once was. I decided to confront the whispers. I sat in the living room, the epicenter of the murmurs, and spoke aloud. "What do you want from me?" I demanded. The whispers paused, and then, in a chilling unison, they answered, "We want to be heard." The air grew colder, and I felt a pressure in the room, as if the atmosphere itself was closing in on me. The The whispers began to take shape, forming words, sentences, stories of lives once lived and lost. They spoke of love, betrayal, pain, and longing. Each voice was distinct, yet they were all bound by a common thread of regret. They were the souls of those who had passed through the house, each leaving behind a fragment of their essence. As I listened, the story of the house began to unfold. It was a place of passage, a threshold between worlds where spirits lingered, unable to move on. My husband had been ensnared by their plight, drawn into their limbo. The whispers needed a vessel, and he had become their unwitting host. Determined to free him, I scoured the house for anything that could break the connection. In the attic, hidden beneath layers of dust, I found an old journal. Its pages were filled with the ramblings of a previous occupant, a medium who had opened the door to the other side and never managed to close it. The medium had left instructions, a ritual that could sever the ties that bound the spirits to this world. It required a sacrifice, something of personal value. I knew what I had to do. I took my wedding ring, the symbol of the love that bound me to my husband, and prepared to perform the ritual. As I chanted the words written in the journal, the house shook, the whispers grew louder, and a wind whipped through the rooms, tearing at the curtains, rattling the windows. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence returned, but it was different now, peaceful. I turned to see my husband, his eyes clear, the fog that had clouded them lifted. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice his own again. But as we embraced, I realized the cost. The ring was gone, and with it, a part of our past. We were free from the whispers, but at what price? The house still stands, a silent sentinel. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I can hear them, the faintest echo of whispers, calling me back to the house. Story 4. Grandma's Presence. I had never believed in ghosts. The very idea seemed like something out of a child's storybook, meant to frighten and entertain. Yet, here I was, standing at the foot of the attic stairs, the echo of my daughter's voice still ringing in my ears. It was late, well past midnight, and the house was shrouded in an uneasy silence. "Come up, Daddy," her voice beckoned again, a chilling sing-song that seemed to seep through the floorboards. My wife, Sarah, had been convinced for weeks that our little Emma was communicating with her deceased grandmother. I had dismissed it as a child's imagination run wild, until now. With each step I took, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press against me. The attic was a place of forgotten things, a graveyard for family relics covered in sheets of time. As I reached the top, I saw her, Emma, sitting in the center of the room, a dusty old phone receiver in her hand. "She wants to talk to you," Emma whispered, offering me the phone with a solemn expression. My heart raced as I took it, half expecting to hear nothing but the static of a deadline. Instead, a familiar voice spoke, warm yet distant. "It's been so long, my dear." The conversation that followed was impossible. Questions and answers flowed, things only her grandmother could know, secrets from my childhood, words from private moments long past. I hung up, my mind reeling, and turned to Emma, who smiled knowingly. "Grandma says she's watching over us," she said, her eyes reflecting an otherworldly glow. "She's always here, in the attic, waiting." The implication of her words sent a shiver down my spine. How could this be? Was it truly her spirit, or something more sinister masquerading in her guise? As I pondered, a sudden gust of wind blew through the attic, extinguishing the candle I had brought. In the darkness, I heard the creak of the old rocking chair, a sound that had not been heard since Grandma passed. And then, a soft, eerie lullaby filled the room, a tune that only she had sung to Emma. The lullaby ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could make out Emma's silhouette, still as a statue. "Did you hear it too, Daddy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to find my voice. The air felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I wanted to grab Emma and flee, but my legs refused to move. "She's here," Emma said, her voice tinged with a mix of fear and awe. Questions raced through my mind. Was this really happening? Was it possible that Sarah had been right all along? The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant that Sarah's mother, the woman who had been a second mother to me, was still with us. Terrifying because it defied all logic. I reached out to touch Emma's shoulder, and she turned to face me. Her eyes, usually so full of life, were now pools of darkness. "She's waiting for you to believe," Emma said, her hand pointing to the corner of the attic where an old chest lay. As I approached the chest, a sense of dread washed over me. The chest had belonged to Sarah's mother, and we had never dared to open it since her passing. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid, and a gust of wind rushed out, scattering old photographs and letters around the attic. Among the scattered memories, one photo caught my eye. It was a picture of Sarah's mother, holding a much younger Emma, both smiling at the camera. But behind them, in the shadows, there was a figure I had never seen before, a figure that seemed to stare back at me from the photo. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the air. A voice, soft and rasping, filled the room. "You must believe to see," it said. And then, the attic light flickered on, revealing the figure from the photo standing right before us. The figure stood motionless, a silent sentinel from a realm beyond our own. Its eyes, hollow and unseeing, were fixed upon me, as if peering into the very depths of my soul. Emma clung to my side, her small hand gripping mine with a strength that belied her years. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear that clawed at my insides. The figure's lips moved, but the words that came were not its own. They were Sarah's mother's, imbued with a warmth that I remembered all too well. "I am a guardian," the voice said, watching over my family from the shadows. The room grew colder still, and the figure began to fade, its edges blurring into the darkness of the attic. I struggled to understand, to accept the reality that was unfolding before me. "Why reveal yourself now?" I asked, desperate for answers. The voice sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Because you are in danger," it said, and the air around us seemed to vibrate with urgency. "There's a presence in this house, one that means to harm you and little Emma." My heart raced, and I held Emma closer. "What presence? What danger?" I pressed, but the figure had become little more than a wisp of smoke. "Beware the whispers," it warned, "for they seek to deceive and destroy." And with that, the figure vanished, leaving us alone in the attic once more. The silence was oppressive, and I could feel Emma trembling against me. We needed to leave, to escape the attic and its secrets. But as we turned to go, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. A new voice, malicious and cruel, echoed through the room. "You cannot leave," it hissed, "for you belong to the house now." Panic set in, and I rushed to the door, pounding on it with all my might. The end. Subscribe for more. Thank you.